right. Hyperlocal solutions to global problems. Let me go back. 2.5. This, I think, is our most important number. Why do I say that? Well, 2.5 is the yearly carbon budget for every person on the planet between now and 2050 if we are to have an 80% chance of limiting global warming to 2 degrees Celsius. I think we've missed the boat on 1.5. That's what everybody used to talk about. I think this now has to be our goal. Okay, this number, 17.19. That is the current average emissions, according to our calculations, for every person in Kendall Square. And by the way, that's much lower than the national average. If you calculate carbon the way I think you should, in other words, the person that eats an avocado grown in Mexico should take the credit for that carbon, or the person that buys a TV put together in China should be charged the carbon rather than the manufacturer in China. So the numbers are much higher, I think, if you calculate it that way. All right, so we're asking, how close can we get to 2.5 by 2030? That's where the date the climate scientists say is kind of the drop-dead date to really take action. Is that even possible? How can we establish priorities? So we set as a goal to build an urban performance model focused on local communities to test what a mayor, what a local community could do to help achieve that goal. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has a really interesting statement that helps us establish what our priorities are. It says urban areas represent 67 to 72% of global emissions. Let's call it 70%. That means there is no solution to climate without focus on cities. We need a new model for cities. And then they add how new cities and towns are designed, constructed, managed, and powered. That's basically the whole process, from design to management to power, construction materials, everything. Will lock in, meaning once it's locked in, it's really hard to change. We'll lock in behavior, lifestyles, and future greenhouse gas emissions. So we have to have this new model for city. We need action at every scale. This is an all hands on deck problem, but most of the discussion is about top-down action. That's carbon tax, decarbonization of the grid, electric vehicles, those kind of things. We're much more interested in local bottom-up action. What could a city do? And this is really critical because 90% of the population growth will take place in cities. As I mentioned, roughly 70% of global emissions are in cities. 90% of wealth is created in cities. So if you want to deal with jobs for the new economy, you have to focus on cities. It's really where all the action is for economic, environmental, and social performance. So we did a case study. How could we transform Kendall Square? It's really a thought experiment because much of the decisions have already been made. Everything's locked in basically already. But it's our backyard, so we thought we'd see what it could have been. This is, that purple area is the Volpe site, this 14-acre site that MIT controls. The planning's largely been done. It's under construction. But I think we could have used that site and other available sites to really transform Kendall Square profoundly. This is the En-ROADS project that we were inspired by. It's put together over at Sloan, but it's really a top-down government action. What could take place at the national, international scale? And dealing largely with public policy. We put together the complement of this, so think of it as the bottom-up model. This looks a little complicated, but it's pretty easy to figure out if you know the code. So up in that upper left box, you can see 9,800 people live in Kendall Square, 42,000 people roughly commute in and out every day. So tremendous waste of time and resources. Then we can look at all the key community scale interventions that we're modeling. There are others, but these are the big ones, I think. We can look at the impact of all those interventions for lowering energy consumption, lowering CO2 emissions. They're not quite aligned. Then we can look at a fine-grained model visualization of the social, economic, and environmental metrics. We can look at different percentages of renewable energy that could be introduced to the area, and then finally we can look at what's being supplied on the grid, okay? So let's go quickly through these community scale interventions. So renewable energy to the grid, we just take the Massachusetts roadmap. You can see there's not a whole lot of solar being added between now and 2030, wind, et cetera. So let's just accept that. Then let's look at electric vehicles. These are the kind of conventional, green city solutions, electric vehicles. So we took the transportation survey, MIT transportation survey, and from that survey we know where people live, we know their schedule, we know where they work, we know their commuting mode, whether they drive by themselves or carpool, et cetera. We did a little thought experiment again. What if everybody drove an electric vehicle? So you dial that up to 100%. Every single person who's commuting in, those 42,000 people, are driving electric vehicles. So what does that do? We start at 17.19. That gets us down to 15.5. Electric vehicles plus decarbonizing the grid with the Massachusetts roadmap. Not going to save the planet. Then we looked at hybrid work. I suspected that hybrid work for the pandemic was actually dramatically lowering emissions. We went from corporate-centric to more of a distributed model, people working from home. And what we found out that even if you introduce significant hybrid work models, in this case 3 days a week, 100% of the people are working at home, it doesn't change much because people are using more air conditioning, they're driving more locally. Deep retrofitted buildings. This is, I think, a critical area that we certainly should do. Electrifying buildings, high performance HVAC insulation, low E lighting and appliances and the like. Okay, so let's look at that. And by the way, I should mention in the upper left hand of the screen, you can see the social and the environmental and the economic. What we're looking for are solutions that ideally do all three. So this does have some social and environmental impact. Electric vehicles, essentially none, because you can introduce better ventilation, et cetera. Anyway, so we're starting a little over 15. So high performance buildings, hybrid work gets us to 14.3. We're not anywhere near 2.5. Live work symmetry. So this is a pretty radical proposal. This is saying let's build housing near workplaces such that everybody that works at Kendall Square has an opportunity to live nearby within walking distance. And that would mean essentially all housing for all the available sites at much higher density than the zoning allows. So we built a cityscope model of Kendall Square. You can dynamically adjust the land uses and the building heights and the density. You can see the impact on this radar plot, which reveals the various performance characteristics. So let's dial that up to 100%. Now, everybody who works in Kendall is living in Kendall. What does that do? Oh, first, okay, we have housing in sync with jobs. We also need amenities, right? Because if you don't add the amenities nearby, then people will just drive a lot to Costco and the grocery store and whatever. So we use mobile phone data to assess what do people actually do by profiles. What do people, a young family with children, what do they do? What are the resources they access and when? And we can look at what is missing in a particular area. So everything with a red X there is missing in Kendall Square. It's really a completely dysfunctional community with respect to activities of daily living. This is a Cityscope model that we did in China, where red is bad, green is good. You're adding parks. You can assess walkable access to parks, or it could be mass transit or shopping, et cetera. So now we introduce both walkable access to housing and amenities, dial that up to 100%, have kind of an idealized walkable community, kind of the ideal 15-minute city that Norman mentioned. Now we're down to 8.54. That actually made a much bigger difference than all those other things. So we're making progress. Now we've built all these houses, 42,000 apartments in the city. Adds a lot of bulk to the city. Maybe we can do better. So we've been looking at transformation. How can you use architectural robotics so a small apartment functions like a bigger apartment? If you can create a 500 square foot apartment that functions like a 1,000 square foot apartment, that's half the embodied energy, half the operational energy essentially, and close to half the cost if you build sufficient housing. So we, some years ago, launched a company to do just that. People thought we were crazy to have beds that drop down from the ceiling, but now we're making this work in the marketplace. This is an apartment in New York that we have, so some random person shot a YouTube video of, or a TikTok video rather. You see, so you got an office on demand, a walk-in closet on demand, the bed drops down from the ceiling. You can visit this, it's in New York. Anyway, we're now in 100 buildings in 50 cities, so we're getting traction, so I do think this is part of the solution. In fact, you can see the little nano apartment, 100 square feet, that functions about like a 200 or 300 square foot apartment, or a little bit bigger, et cetera. So it's not about the tiny apartments, it's about how efficiently you use the space using transformation. You don't need a bedroom during the day or a living room at night. You use the same volume for both. So with our CityScale platform, we can now move these land use types around, but you're dragging people with them, profiles of people, and as you change the density, you can update the simulation and assess the human dynamics of a neighborhood as a function of all these properties. So now we create compact housing. We've reduced the bulk dramatically because we're using space much more efficiently. And the social performance goes up because you create more affordability and equity and the like in the city. Tremendous impact on the environmental performance, as I said. So 8.54 goes down to, well, not as much as I was hoping for. But anyway, it's something that we need for both social and economic and environmental performance. Lightweight community mobility. So people are living near where they work and they have all the amenities they need. It would be insane to drive a 4,000-pound vehicle that's capable of going 160 miles an hour across the Kendall Square to go to the grocery store. So we're looking at lightweight mobility that has some of the properties of bike share and Uber and ride share. We're looking at, we developed a whole suite of little lightweight vehicles that you call like an Uber. They come to you, they act like social robots in the city and good citizens to pedestrians. This is an early prototype. We have newer ones. Naroa will talk about that a little bit later. So now we introduce lightweight mobility. What does that do? We're at 8.2, 8.17. Well, they're already very efficient and we've already gotten rid of cars. So it's not surprising that the environmental impact is not as great as it could be if you didn't have the live-work symmetry, but there's a great social impact because people have mechanized mobility solutions within the neighborhood. Low carbon diet, local production. So the typical American diet is 2.8 tons of carbon per person per year. That's already above our total of 2.5. Okay, so we do a plant-based diet and local production. We think we could probably get it down to 1.4. I think we could even go further. We need a lot of innovation in this area. So some years ago, we built the City Farm project right downstairs, looking at aeroponics, production near the point of consumption. We operated this lab, I think, in 2013 to 2015. Recently, there's been this explosion of creative activity in industry. These are robotic, urban, agricultural systems, automatic planting and harvesting, et cetera. And there's lab-grown meat. So I think eventually we'll be able to get a synthetic ribeye and enjoy our meat without the environmental harm of meat. So now we dial that up to 100%. Everybody is eating plant-based products, grown, produced near the point of consumption. We're 7.78. So we've reduced the emissions about as far as we can through those interventions. We now have to look at sources of clean energy. So solar is great. You need a lot of land to power a high-density city like Cambridge. We don't have land around here. There's tremendous opposition to expanding the grid. I do believe, just like food near the point of consumption, we need power near the point of consumption, high-density power. And so we're looking at, okay, well, in this case, we dial photovoltaics within Kendall Square using every available surface, and it barely moves the needle. We just don't have enough surface area to capture enough photons to make a difference in a high-density neighborhood. But there's a whole generation of new technology. These are nuclear batteries. Some call them small modular reactors that are a little bit bigger, anywhere from 5 to 20 megawatts. They can be shipped on the back of a truck. There's no reason why they couldn't be powering Kendall Square, a resilient microgrid within the district. Ultimately, though, we will have fusion. So I'm very interested in how we design fusion-ready cities. It's very different than how you design solar-ready cities. So this is the Spark reactor. There's now an MIT spin-off, Commonwealth Power, that hopes to commercialize that by 2040. We need interim solutions, though. We can't wait on fusion. So that gets us down to 5.94. That's still not anywhere near the 2.5. What's left? Well, things that aren't in our model yet, eventually they will be: air travel, durable goods, internet, server farms, all of that. We have a lot more work to do. Now, what we're going to do now, think of this talk right here as an introduction to a series of chapters. So my team, we're going to have 6 quick talks. They're going to take the key elements of this model that I just outlined and give you a little more detail. And this is a model we're going to be working on, I'm sure, for years, and we need all of your help. It really is a work in progress. We just went public with this model 2 weeks ago at the Technology Review Climate Tech Conference. So, and one thing I want to point out is a lot of the thinking are on the outer ring and the inner ring. You know, electric vehicles, decarbonization, air travel, the grid, et cetera. I think the big action, the big impact can happen in those middle rings, because those are the areas where it's a win-win-win, where you get the environmental and the social and the economic benefit. So, okay, remember we start at 17.19. Let's just accept the conventional green stuff. Electric vehicles, decarbonization of the grid, and I'm going to turn it over to Luis Alonso to take it the next step.